Hey everyone, I'm excited to announce the November Kiss, Keeping It Simple Sew Along. This month we'll be making the Merry Christmas stocking. The project consists of 2 front blocks, 2 back blocks and 2 cuff blocks. In this video I will demonstrate the front bottom block and one of the cuff blocks. Then Martin will join me and explain how to construct the Christmas tree stocking using a sewing machine. We also recommend you follow along with the photograph written instructions provided with your purchase. And don't forget to head on over to the Sweet Pea Machine Embroidery Designs Facebook group to get a 30% discount code and learn about the rules for the monthly competition. You can find the link for that group in the description of this video. If you enjoyed this video tutorial on the Merry Christmas stocking, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the video. Here's my step-by-step guide to making the front bottom block. First, hoop up the cutaway stabilizer in the hoop. Start by stitching the place align for the batting. Place batting 1 on top of the hoop and then stitch it down. Once done, remove the hoop from the machine and trim the excess batting, leaving about 1 to 2 mm from the stitching. Next, stitch the place align for the top strip. And then place fabric A right side up over the hoop, covering the place align and then stitch it down. Now trim the excess fabric similar to the batting. Then repeat the applique process with the middle strip using fabric B and the bottom strip using fabric C. Next, proceed with the embroidery steps, following along with your photograph written instructions. Once the embroidery is complete, carefully remove the fabric from the hoop and trim the seams to about 1/2 inch. Hold the completed front bottom block aside until further assembly. Now let's walk through the steps to create the cuff sections. You're going to make 2 of these blocks. First, hoop up cutaway stabilizer in the hoop, then load the design onto your machine and utilize applique scissors for precise trimming of the batting and fabric. Then start by stitching the place and line for the batting. Place batting 5 on top of the placement lines and stitch it down. Remove the hoop from your machine and trim the excess batting, leaving about 1 to 2 mm from the stitching. Then place fabric A right side up on top of the hoop, covering the batting. Stitch it down securely. Then proceed with the embroidery steps, following along with your photograph written instructions for reference. Once the embroidery is complete, carefully remove the fabric from the hoop and trim the seams to about 1/2 inch. Repeat the entire process to create a second cuff block, ensuring that both blocks are made with the same attention to detail. Hold the completed cuff blocks aside for further assembly. Follow these instructions closely for a perfectly crafted set of cuff sections to complement your Merry Christmas stocking.
Christmas stockings. Let's lay out our pieces. So we have a front and back stocking, and we have a front and back top cuff. Let's need to cut the lining first. So a fat quarter is quite sufficient, if you mean. Probably you could get the cuff lining and the stocking out of 1 fat quarter, which you could quite easily. I'm going to do it out of 2 to show you the contrast of the fabrics. It's easier for you to see in the video. So let's just lay our stocking. They're both the same size, so it's both the same shape, so you just use one of them. One was using the front. Pin it on and trim around the edge using the stocking as a pattern for your lining. You will see a bit of this lining at the top of the stocking when it's finished, so something fun and Christmassy inside will be great. Now you could, if you've got a long fat quarter, you can actually get those out. Otherwise you can fold that up and they will actually come out of that middle section. I'm just using some green just as a contrast for you can see better on the video. That's a bit wasteful. Let's turn it the other way. Pin it into position. Again using the cuff panel as a pattern. And we're going to use the same fabric to actually cut our loop to hang our stocking from. So there's our cuff linings. I'm going to trim off 3/8 of an inch or a centimetre from one of the edges to make the lining slightly shorter than the cuff itself. because it will be all crunched up underneath it once it's actually applied to the stocking, and it will look bulky if we don't do this. There we have our two cuffs, our two cuff linings. Our stocking front, our stocking back, and our two stocking linings. Now we're ready to assemble. I'm just going to make our loop. I think it's about 6 inches by, I think I might have used 2.5. Fold it in half widthways, fold the raw edges to your centre crease. Do that on both sides. And then fold them again. So folded edges on top of each other. And then with the sewing machine we're going to stitch down each side of this loop with some stitching. So it looks like it's been top stitched, and that will be what will hang our stocking from. Let's go to the machine. I've got my needle swung to the left hand side of the foot. And with a longer stitch, just edge stitch along both edges. And once we have that completed, let's fold that in half and machine base the bottom raw edges together to create our loop. Just machine base the width of the presser foot. Just trim those threads off. Now, let's join our cuff. So, we do have a pattern match here, so be aware of that. And we're stitching just inside the perimeter line. This is a shiny knit fabric, so it has a little bit of a stretch to it there, which is not ideal, but it does look like foil. You can just finger press that open for the time being. So one seam done. Let's do our lining, our matching lining. So we're going to use our short sides, right sides together. 1/2 inch seam. And I'm going to finger press that seam open as well. Just use the tip of your nail. Right, edge to edge. So long seam to long seam, and so it's the pattern that has the seam that has the embroidery pattern close to it. That's the one we're going to be working with. Let's put our lining on and see the difference there. So that was what we cut off. Just sew for a little section there. We really want to be using our perimeter stitching line as our guide. So we're just sewing just to the left hand side of our perimeter stitching line, intersection on intersection, seams open. All the way through. Then, with our seam allowance, with our seams pointing to the lining underneath, pointing that way, let's just run an edge stitch along the top of there to actually hold that lining up into place so it doesn't hang out the bottom of the cuff when the project is finished. That's what we call understitching. So when that seam is turned inside out, it will just keep that lining seam up and we won't have too much bother with it. We want to fold that cuff, which has now been stitched in 2 sections with the lining and the main panels, fold its right sides together and stitch our final seam. It's easier to put a cuff this size together like this as opposed to making 2 separate tubes, because trying to do the understitching with 2 separate tubes will be impossible. Right, there we have it. Press those seams open. And then turn our work through. Seam on seam, raw edges together. So the green is the underside of the cuff. You will not ever see this. Make sure those raw edges are together. Because this lining is shorter, naturally you'll want to pull down away from the edge of the actual gold fabric. It will naturally want to do that. But we want it to stay in position so as it actually does its job. And you can already see that the gold at the bottom is actually poking just to the lining side. And that will ensure that we don't see the lining when the project is finished. See, it just rolls under. Ever so subtly, but definitely worth trimming it off. So let's start at one of the intersection seams, and we're just stitching on top of the stitching line, the perimeter stitching line that the embroidery created. We're just stitching on top of that. Use it as our guideline to actually keep both the outer panel of the cuff and the lining together at the top where the raw edges are. And that completes our cuff, because the cuff is going to be sandwiched between the actual stocking and the stocking lining, so we won't see the seam. It doesn't need to be neatened. It's going to be sitting inside the sock or the stocking. Right. Just take your time. This fabric is slightly sticking to the bottom of the foot. Not a bother, but just ever so slightly. So when it's turned through, it looks like it's all wrinkly and it's not sitting flat, but when that top seam is turned over, it will be fine. Just that. When that's turned over, see how it goes nice and flat. Right, a pair of those. Now, let's put our stocking together. Match all our seams around the outside edge. Make sure that our continued design lines of the hills and the valleys of the satin stitch and also our join are all matched up. Pop a clip or pin on those matching seams. So we're wanting the seams to be sitting on top of the seams on the under and sides, because this is right sides together, of course. We want to make sure that those seams are sitting on top of each other. When I say seams, the perimeter stitching lines that our embroidery did. And we're going to be stitching just the left-hand side of that perimeter stitching line. I'm using a slightly shortened stitch because we've got curves which we're going to need to turn out. Rather than the edges sitting flush together, we've got to make sure those seams sit on top of each other. That's the most important thing around the curves. So to trim, we're just going to trim around the curved areas. No need to trim the straight areas at the top of the stocking, just the curved areas, finishing at that last satin stitch line, and snip the curves all the way around every 3/8 or centimetre, or every half an inch, whatever suits you. Change to smaller snips so as I'm not going to clip any of my stitching. And once this is completed, we need to do the same sort of technique for our lining fabric. So again, we're going to be matching all around the outside edges, but along this edge we need to leave an opening so we can turn the project through. So come down about 3 inches, and we want 5 to 6 inches of opening. 5 is enough, just so as that we can turn our project through, and then just put some clips around the other edges. And we want to sew with a generous 1/2 inch seam, so let's sew for our first 3 inches until we get to the opening which we're going to pull our project through. So reverse and trim, and then start again. Leaving that opening is really, really important, and we leave it in that seam because it's a straight of grain and the easiest to actually close. A generous 1/2 inch seam. There we go, I think that's our opening. And like we did with the outside panels when they were joined, just trim back the curved areas to 1/4 inch. And just finish when we get to our straight. Well, that's where our opening is, so we're just finishing there. Keep that seam allowance at our opening at 1/2 inch. We don't want to actually put that turning through seam anywhere other than where it is along that straight seam. So let's open up our straight seams first. I'm just using a sleeve board. You could use a rolled up hand towel or a sleeve pad or a pressing ham pad. We're just using a sleeve board, and again we've done the same with our lining, and we've ironed back our seam allowances of our opening and our lining. Let's turn the work through. Put your hand in, grab the toe and pull it back up through. Trimming those seams back and clipping those to trimming the seams back to 1/4 inch and then clipping all around the curved areas definitely makes it turn out so easy. Just roll those seams a little bit with a bit of steam to get those all the way out and nicely curved. So the lower section of the stocking is flat, and the upper section of the blue has the seams opened. Let's go back to the machine. So we're going to attach the cuff onto the top of the stocking. Now I'm just snipping that top seam of the stocking. Now slip the cuff over and find our side seams onto side seams, pin or clip those into position. Now your cuff is slightly bigger than your stocking, so as that when it's finished and turned over the stocking, it sits correctly. Otherwise it will sit tight if it's the same measurement. So the cuff is slightly bigger. Don't forget we're going to be putting our loop on there, so don't forget your loop. But we want to attach this first. So what happens is that we're going to start at an intersection, seam on seam, sewing on the original stitching line again, and slightly pull the top layer so as it actually ever so slightly gathers up the cuff. The cuff will feel quite full, so pull that top layer so as it eases the cuff on. That's why we snipped that top edge of the stocking before we started, so as that it would have a little bit of a give and slightly stretch to the cuff. When we finish this, you'll see the cuff looks like it's quite full in the seam, but it's really not. It needs to be like this. So the differences about it is a really good 1/2 inch difference in size, but totally achievable to sew together. Just try not to get any puckers. Right, let's just put on the back seam, side seam, or the back seam, we're going to just attach our loop within the seam allowance at the top there so we don't forget it. See how it's a little bit full? It's just a little bit full around that top edge. Now let's slip our stocking inside the lining. Make sure it's around the right way. So we're just going to fold it up like origami and slip it down the tube of the lining. Seam on seam. Some clips into place. Keep those raw edges all together. So we're sandwiching the cuff in between the lining and the stocking, even though the cuff is attached to the stocking already. But that's what it is going to be, it's a sandwich. Let's start at a seam again. And stitching just to the left hand side of the original row of stitching that is there. Just a needle width in. Again, slightly pulling this, although the lining has got a little bit of stretch to it, even though it's woven, it's still got a little bit of give to it, so it won't be any hassle to actually stitch that on into place. Right there, we're stitching over our loop. Almost done. Let's pull this out through the hole we left in our lining. While we have it there, we should actually close up that lining loop. We don't need it open anymore. See, it's just slightly full through there. It looks like it's going to be too big, but once it's folded over, it's not. Make sure there's no pleats in our opening there. Let's just edge stitch this opening closed. On the back seam of the lining, just edge stitch it with a straight stitch, that's more than sufficient. Push the lining back down to the stocking, pushing the lining toe into the stocking toe. Fold the cuff over, and we are done. Fun little project. A great decoration. And you can use up your scraps.
Thank you so much for watching our tutorial on creating the Merry Christmas stocking. For more exciting sewing projects and machine embroidery designs, visit our website at sweepy.com. And also, don't forget to join our Sweepy Machine Embroidery Designs Facebook group for exclusive discounts and monthly competition updates. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more creative inspirations. Happy sewing, and we'll see you in the next video.